Our guest host this morning is Kevin Warsh. He is former Fed governor and distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. He's also author of a Wall Street Journal op-ed that was published yesterday that got a lot of attention. It was headlined, "The Fed Can't Wait to Respond to the Coronavirus. U.S. central bankers should lead a global response." Kevin, it is great to have you here today.
Becky, thanks very much for having me.
We spent a lot of time on our air yesterday talking about your op-ed. The markets, I think, took it as a signal as to what might be coming. In fact, very early yesterday morning, you did see the Fed futures indicate that we could see a cut as recently as March. Let's talk about why you wrote this right now, what you're seeing.
So I wrote it because, I'm not in the middle of these things. Chairman Powell and his guys are. It's a tough moment to be at the Federal Reserve. In the middle of a week like this, all you want to do is get to the weekend. Get to the weekend where you can have no markets trading, or you can sit down with your kitchen cabinet, ask hard questions, and think what to do. And so I thought it was good advice. It was the sort of advice that we got in the darkest days of the crisis. I remember Marty Feldstein, who's no longer with us, but a great friend and mentor, who, when we were trying to figure out what to do, we were at Jackson Hole, and he went up and said, the Fed needs to cut rates materially. They need to do it now. And we said, oh, well, that's not so helpful. But he might just think again about where we are and reassess things. So it was just to give my best candid advice. They know more than we do about the state of the coronavirus. They know what their tools are. They've certainly had discussions, I would think, with their counterparts around the world. That's my unvarnished view. Get them to the weekend. Let them take stock. The gloss of history forgets all the mistakes we made early in our crisis. I think they'll get to the weekend and then they'll think anew about what the path is and what markets are telling them.
Why do you think a coordinated global rate cut would be useful at this point?
So I think it's likely to be a gunfight out there. When I look at the world's big central banks, not a lot of them have guns. Maybe the Fed has a bigger gun than everyone else, but the Fed probably has a knife. I wish they had a big, powerful gun coming into this moment. I wish they had more ammunition. I wish, for the discussions we've had on this show over the last 9 years, they had prepared themselves for an exogenous shock, because we certainly didn't know this virus was coming. But we knew that complacency in a world like this sets itself up for big tail risks. But you go to a market with the Fed you've got, not the Fed you want. They've got a knife. There's a gunfight. You might as well go find some friends that also have knives and see if you can't do it together. So you're saying there's some knives out there in the other big central banks.
You think there's some they're knives, not guns, because rates are already so low and negative interest rates in many parts of the globe?
Yeah, I mean, this is a time where the country needs to come together, where has-been central bankers and the current generation of central bankers need to unite. But my judgment early in this crisis, as you know, was that the Fed needed to restock its toolkit, restock its credibility, create it such that they could shrink its balance sheet and prepare for whatever big shocks happen. And, what we find is that opportunity was missed over the last 9 years. But the Fed will be successful here. I'm not doubting them. And believe me, we made plenty of mistakes early in our crisis. So if this thing manifests itself in an ugly way, my instinct would be that Chairman Powell needs to reach out to his counterparts around the world and buy some time. That's what a quarter point could do.
Let's just say, you just said if this manifests itself in an ugly way, meaning we're not there right now, meaning it's not necessarily next week that the Fed needs to cut?
I think the sooner they cut, the better. If I were giving them advice, I would say get to this weekend, take stock, reach out starting at the close of business today to the world's central bankers, and at the very least on Sunday night before markets open, have a unified statement from the big central bankers in the world that they are all over this. They're closely monitoring the situation. They're prepared to take whatever action is appropriate in their jurisdictions just to see whether they can't buy some time and learn more. The purpose of that isn't just a signal to the markets. It's a signal to businesses out there that they shouldn't decide to give up on 2020, give up on their growth projections, pull back on their CapEx, that a little time can be bought. That's what central bankers can do. We can buy a little bit of time, and I'd suggest that they better do it sooner than later.
Do you think that creates a firewall in terms of the market? We've been talking about what is that firewall? What is that inflection point piece of news that would have to come likely from a government entity or potentially, obviously, if a vaccine emerged, that would change the direction of this market right now?
Given their tools, I wouldn't call it a firewall, but it could be a period of détente. a period at which the world can learn more about the disease, learn more about the economic impacts, and make it such that negative financial markets don't become a self-fulfilling prophecy and find their way into the real economy, such that when people get their heads above water, the economy is in a much worse place.